A pair of eyes appeared at the edge of the firelight. Not close enough to be seen clearly, not far enough to be ignored. Beyond the glow, beyond the circle of sleeping humans, something small stood motionless among the shadows. Its body disappeared into the darkness. Only the eyes remained, watching, not with fear, not with trust, with calculation. The humans never noticed. Or perhaps they did. And that is where one of the strangest relationships in the history of life may have begun. Not with affection, not with domestication, not even with contact, but with observation. A silent predator studying another predator, and neither realizing that the future of both species was about to change forever. Most people imagine the first cat as a pet, curled beside a fire, sleeping in a human shelter, accepting food from grateful hands. That is not what happened. The first cat that lived with humans was not a pet at all. It was wild, entirely wild. It had never seen a litter box, never purred for attention, never depended on anyone. It belonged to a lineage that had spent millions of years surviving alone. Cats were not social animals. They did not hunt in packs. They did not form cooperative groups like wolves. They did not seek companionship. A wildcat's life was built around solitude. Every movement was calculated. Every sound was evaluated. Every encounter carried risk. To a wildcat, another living creature was usually one of three things: competition, danger, or food. Human beings initially belonged to the second category, danger. And yet something unusual was happening around the first permanent human settlements. Something that neither species had planned. Something that evolution itself had quietly arranged. Around 12,000 years ago, humanity was changing. For hundreds of thousands of years, humans had wandered across landscapes as hunters and gatherers. They followed migrations, seasons, weather, and food. They moved because movement was survival. Then, gradually in several parts of the world, something unprecedented occurred. Humans began staying in one place. They planted crops, stored grain, built settlements, and created permanence. Most history books describe this as the birth of agriculture. But agriculture produced something else, something far less celebrated: an explosion of rodents. The moment humans started storing food, they unintentionally created paradise for mice and rats. Granaries became enormous feeding stations. Entire settlements became ecosystems. Food attracted rodents. Rodents multiplied, and somewhere beyond the fields, hidden among grasses and stones, predators noticed. The opportunity was impossible to ignore. Among those predators was a small wildcat, known today as Felis silvestris libica, the African wildcat, the ancestor of nearly every domestic cat alive today. And unlike humans, it wasn't interested in civilization. It was interested in the creatures civilization accidentally created. Imagine approaching a human settlement 12,000 years ago. Smoke rises into the air. Voices echo across the fields. Dogs bark in the distance. Strange smells drift from cooking fires. For most animals, this environment would have felt dangerous. But for a hunter following mice, it felt different. It felt abundant. Researchers believe the first cats may have been drawn toward human settlements for a surprisingly simple reason. The humans were not the target. The mice were. Civilization had become prey-rich territory. And so, night after night, wildcats began slipping closer. Not because humans invited them, because evolution rewarded them. The cats that tolerated human proximity gained access to extraordinary hunting grounds. The cats that remained deep in the wilderness did not. A subtle filter emerged, not forced by humans, created by opportunity. Generation after generation, slightly less fearful cats enjoyed slightly greater success. And over centuries, those tiny differences began accumulating into something remarkable. Most domesticated animals were deliberately changed by humans. Dogs were selected. Horses were bred. Cattle were managed. Cats appear to have followed a different path. In many ways, cats domesticated themselves, at least partially. This idea sounds strange because domestication usually feels like a human achievement. But the evidence suggests the relationship between humans and cats evolved through mutual advantage rather than direct control. Humans tolerated the cats because they hunted pests. Cats tolerated humans because humans generated pests. Neither side needed affection. Neither side needed loyalty. Both sides benefited. The arrangement was elegant, and perhaps that is why it succeeded. Thousands of years passed. Settlements became villages. Villages became towns. Towns became cities. The partnership endured, and something fascinating began happening inside the minds of cats. Researchers comparing domestic cats with their wild ancestors noticed that the differences are surprisingly small, much smaller than the differences between wolves and dogs. A house cat remains astonishingly close to its wild roots. Its body, its instincts, its hunting behavior, its sensory systems, much of it remains intact. A cat sleeping peacefully on a sofa still carries the neurological machinery of a solitary predator. The wilderness never fully disappeared. It simply moved indoors, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. Perhaps cats never became fully domesticated in the way humans imagine. Perhaps they merely learned how to live beside us. This may explain one of the enduring mysteries of cat behavior. Dogs often treat humans as social leaders. Cats frequently do not. A dog sees hierarchy. A cat sees coexistence. Scientists studying feline cognition have repeatedly encountered something curious. Cats recognize their owners. They learn routines. They form attachments. They experience stress when separated from familiar humans. Yet they retain an unusual degree of independence, almost as though part of the relationship remains negotiated rather than inherited. A cat can love a human, but it never entirely stops being itself. And perhaps that independence is not a flaw of domestication. Perhaps it is evidence of how the relationship began. In 2004, archaeologists working on the Mediterranean island of Cyprus uncovered something unexpected, a human burial nearly 10,000 years old. Beside the human lay a cat, carefully placed, intentionally buried. The discovery forced researchers to reconsider long-held assumptions. Cats were not merely visiting settlements. They had become important enough to accompany humans into death. The implications were profound because Cyprus had no native wildcats. The animal must have been transported there by people, across water, deliberately. Someone had decided that this creature mattered, not economically, personally. The relationship had crossed an invisible threshold. Somewhere between predator and companion, a new category had emerged, and humanity itself was changing in response. The story becomes even stranger when viewed from the cat's perspective. Human beings became the most successful species on Earth. We transformed landscapes, redirected rivers, built cities visible from space. And throughout this extraordinary expansion, cats followed. Not as servants, not as slaves, but as passengers. Every major civilization eventually carried them. Ancient Egypt elevated them into symbols of divinity. Merchants brought them aboard ships. Explorers carried them across oceans. Settlers transported them to continents their ancestors had never known. Wherever grain moved, rodents followed. Wherever rodents followed, cats appeared. The spread of civilization became the spread of cats, an evolutionary strategy so successful that today there are hundreds of millions of domestic cats across the planet. A former wild predator now occupies nearly every corner of the human world, and yet the original bargain remains recognizable. The agreement never truly ended. Most people think they chose cats. History suggests something more complicated. The first cat approached because humans created opportunity. Humans accepted the cat because the cat solved the problem. Both species benefited. Both species adapted. And over thousands of years, that practical arrangement slowly transformed into something neither evolution nor natural selection could have predicted: attachment. Not perfect attachment, not unconditional attachment. Something subtler. A relationship balanced between wildness and familiarity, between distance and trust, between independence and belonging. Few partnerships in nature occupy such unusual territory. There's a deeper lesson hidden inside this story. Human civilization often feels intentional, as though history advances according to plans, goals, and decisions. But many of the forces that shape the world emerge accidentally. A field of grain attracts mice. Mice attract predators. Predators approach humans. Generations pass. A new relationship appears. Civilizations are built not only by human choices, but by countless unintended consequences unfolding quietly beneath awareness. The first cat may never have intended to live beside humans. Humans may never have intended to share their future with cats. Yet here we are, thousands of years later, still sharing the same spaces, still observing one another, still participating in a partnership that began with a pair of eyes watching from beyond a fire. And perhaps that is the most unsettling realization of all. When we imagine history, we usually focus on kings, wars, inventions, and empires. But sometimes the future changes because a small predator notices an opportunity in the darkness. No grand strategy, no master plan, only a silent decision made by a creature following hunger. A single step toward the firelight, a single night among the shadows. And from that moment, an invisible thread stretched across 12,000 years, connecting an ancient wildcat to the animal sleeping on a windowsill today. A reminder that history is not always shaped by the powerful. Sometimes it is shaped by the patient, by the unnoticed, by the creatures standing just beyond the edge of the light, watching, waiting, and quietly changing the world.